When the Berlin Wall came down, the bipolar global world disappeared. You now had the United States. Secondly, a divided Europe suddenly found itself with the prospect of unification or reconnection. And that reconnection meant that 12 countries, which had previously been cut off, and 12 innumerable sets of families and cousins and relations and cultures and cities that we now take for granted, like weekends in Riga or in Prague, now become a reality that were simply distant. They were as far away as Timbuktu 12 years ago. Whatever the time was. Thank you. That forced European people in their cozy Western European economic community, the European Union, to look at how we're going to deal with this. We were set up to actually create a social market economy within which we could have all the things that we traditionally had when we joined in 1973. And two issues came to the fore. Common foreign policy. Can we agree on what we want to do together and how do we do it together? And common foreign security in relation to justice and home affairs. Criminals, trafficking. Because, you know, while the big multinationals that Joe refers to have made great use and effect of an integrated market, the richest market in the world of 500 million people, they're not the only people who've been making hay. They're not the only people who've been having a hell of a good time. And the people that I'm referring to don't file their accounts with the Companies Office. I'm talking about the drugs barons, the gangs that the Criminal Assets Bureau go after, the people who have trafficked 50,000 women and children into the European Union over the last 10 years. A drugs trade that is worth 50 billion in terms of its value to the drugs lords, many of whom are paddies, serial criminal Irish people living in Spain or in the Netherlands, and who have, as Joe will testify and as I will testify, because my constituency of Dublin South East is not Dublin 4 or the Embassy Belt, it's also City Key and part of the Liberties. And I've seen not just families, but second and third generations of families devastated by the damage that these drugs do. So this is not a victimless crime. Now how do we catch them? How do we stop them? How do we get the police force in Spain to give us the information so that the police in Amsterdam can link back to the castle here in Harcourt Square and get the CAB to start to work together? We need more cooperation. We need to share information. We need to be able to say if a paedophile who serves time in Hungary is released and comes to live in Ireland, that there is an obligation on the Hungarian police to notify the authorities here so this person doesn't end up as a swimming instructor somewhere in the rest of Ireland. Now, no group of countries has ever been here before, because the European Union is not a federal state. It's not a potential federal state. It doesn't want to become a federal state. We are creating force majeure because of our history of 3 times changing our frontiers in 1 century. We are creating something totally new that does not exist anywhere else in the world, and which is necessary for us to confront the problems of the present and the future. And that is, how do 27 sovereign democratic states with their own traditions of decision making, referenda or no referenda, their own culture, their own civil war past, because we're not the only country that had a civil war and irrational political divisions, how do those 27 countries come together and say, this bit of our sovereignty doesn't really work very well if we exercise it on our own, but if we combine it with yours and yours and yours and yours and get 15 countries in together, we'll have a single currency called the euro, which will be immune to all the political and economic shocks that we've seen over the last 15 years, and we haven't had a ripple on our interest rates. For those of you in your room, and they're not all as young as you might think they are, some of them going back to 1992 might remember the threat of interest rates going to 15 and 17%. And every time there was an economic crisis in the past, there was currency fluctuation right across the whole of Europe. And it permanently impeded our ability to provide economic stability in which people could invest. That's what the euro is giving. And we're part of that. We've had extraordinary crises right across the global system. If you want to know what Ireland would have been like, had we not joined the euro, and if you're interested in this territory, get out any financial document and look at where Iceland is. Just look at where Iceland is today. Just look at where Iceland is today. And that's where Finland would have been, that's where Portugal would have been, that's where Greece would have been, and that's where Ireland would have been. And that's the euro. Now we're an island off the mainland of Europe. So we're not used to crossing boundaries and producing papers and stamping and getting visas and show your papers and identity cards, etc. But that was the continental experience for a whole host of people. And there was harassment and corruption and all of the threats that go with that. Now a European citizen can go from Helsinki to Lisbon and not encounter a single barrier or border. Inconceivable. Inconceivable in previous times. They are free citizens of this space with rights to a European Parliament whose powers will be enhanced by this treaty if it goes through. And let me talk about the treaty specifically in terms of how we will just address one issue of democracy. And I'll come back to the points that Joe has raised if I can, give him time. But you know, he's a long old mate of mine, and no better trick than to say that I want Ruairi to answer these questions. And if I took all the time to answer these questions, he would have set my agenda. So I'm going to try and answer some, but not all. The Commission is there. It proposes to both the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament. And when they have done their compromises, and because there's no majority anywhere, everything is done by negotiation and compromise. And when they've done their compromise, it then comes to the 27 national governments, and we, myself and Joe, when we were there, would then be given a draft legislation to implement Directive X, Y, Z, and we were told, well look, the bulk of this has already been decided, you really don't have much room to change it, just do it and implement it. Lisbon will make the following change, and I think it's fundamental in terms of a democratic European Union. And the following change is this. Same process, Commission proposes, sends its proposal to the Council of Ministers and to the Parliament, but at exactly the same time, it sends its proposal to all 27 national parliaments. And we have 8 weeks in which to respond. And we can say, wait a second, this is an intrusion into our local territory. This is a breach of the principle of subsidiarity, which basically says decisions should be made at the most appropriate level where they can be implemented. And the European Union is not the appropriate level. Leinster House, the House of Commons, the Assemblée Nationale de France, is the appropriate level. And they can put up an orange card. And if 1/3, 9 parliaments so agree, and there's a structure now where they're talking all the time, the European Affairs Committees of all of the parliaments have their own integrated structure called COSAC, they can say, back off. And the backing off means that they have to withdraw. And I think I'm 3 minutes into that. Okay. That change will mean that change is in Lisbon. It doesn't exist at the moment. If the change is implemented through Lisbon, and we do agree that this is a necessary measure that should be discussed, we can call in the Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment and say, what line are you going to take on this particular issue before the decision is made? And that is the same. And finally, the Council of Ministers, when they're actually legislating, have to now do it in public, whereas currently they don't do it in private. I'm running out of time and I want to conclude. I believe we face challenges that we've never faced before. I believe the European Union, a market of 500 million people, the richest area in one sense in the world, but with a difficult past, needs the instruments of decision making to make it fit for purpose for the 21st century. I believe the issues that confront us are some of the issues that Joe has said, like the exploitation of women and child labour in third world markets. I believe the WTO is an effective organisation that needs to have the kind of civilising impulses that the European Union has done for itself. I believe we can bring to bear the kind of experience that we've had in creating a zone of peace, prosperity and equality and environmental responsibility that we've never previously seen, and promote that to the rest of the world, not with the tank, not with occupation forces, but with the power of our own persuasion and our own experience. And at the end of the day, and I'll finish on this point, at the end of the day, in my view, what the Lisbon Treaty basically does is to give the European Union the instruments to make it fit for purpose for the 21st century. No more, no less. And for those reasons, and for many more that time prevents me from articulating, I believe it provides no threat to the kind of things that we have held sacred in the past, and Tom Drummond has referred to them, but it does give us the opportunity to make Europe's voice, not just Ireland's voice, but Europe's voice very effective in a world that needs a voice of sanity when you see on the one hand China and the other hand North America and the United States. Thank you.